Cheating wife leaves for lover, then faces ultimate betrayal. Shocking true story. I came home late that night, exhausted from another long shift. The house was dark except for the soft glow of the living room lamp. I expected to find my wife asleep or maybe curled up on the couch with a book like she used to. But the moment I stepped inside, I felt something was off. Her coat was missing from the rack, her shoes weren't by the door, and worst of all, silence. No, hey, you're home. No warm smile. Just emptiness. I dropped my keys on the counter and walked into the kitchen. Dishes sat in the sink, untouched. The table was clear, no dinner waiting for me, no note explaining why. I sighed, rubbing the back of my neck. Maybe she went out with friends. Maybe she took our daughter somewhere. But something gnawed at me, something I couldn't shake. I reached for my phone and dialed her number. Straight to voicemail. That was strange. She always kept her phone on, even when she was out. Trying to push the growing unease aside, I grabbed a beer from the fridge and sat down in the dimly lit living room. I told myself I was overthinking. We had been distant lately, sure. Conversations had become more about logistics, bills, the kids, schedules rather than us. But that was normal, right? After years of marriage, people got comfortable. Maybe too comfortable. But I wasn't prepared for what happened next. The front door creaked open. My wife walked in, her hair slightly messy, her makeup smudged just enough to make my heart start pounding. She froze when she saw me. "Oh," she said, as if she wasn't expecting me. "You're still up." I glanced at the clock. It's barely past 10. She shifted her weight, avoiding my gaze. I was out with some friends. A lie. I knew it instantly. I set my drink down, my fingers tightening around the bottle. "Who?" She hesitated. That second of silence told me everything. "Just some people from work," she finally answered, forcing a smile. We grabbed a drink after hours. I studied her, every little detail. The way she clutched her purse tighter than usual. The slight tremor in her voice. "Where?" I pressed. She frowned. "What? Where did you go?" "Why does it matter?" There was that defensive edge. The way people react when they've been caught, even if they don't know it yet. "Because you never go out this late," I said, my voice calm but firm. "And you never turn your phone off." She exhaled sharply, dropping her purse onto the counter. "I don't need to report my every move to you." That's when I knew. I stood up slowly, the room suddenly feeling smaller, like the walls were pressing in. "Who is he?" Her breath hitched. She tried to scoff, to play it off, but her body betrayed her. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but the way she avoided my eyes told me everything I needed to know. I stepped closer, not threatening, just searching for the truth. "Say his name." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "You're being ridiculous." I let out a slow breath, nodding to myself. I had suspected for weeks, maybe months, but I had buried it under excuses. Late nights. Extra meetings. The sudden attention to her appearance. I had wanted to believe we were just in a rough patch. But there was no denying it now. She had already left me in her heart. And the worst part? I had no idea how long I had been living in this lie. I didn't sleep that night. After she went to bed, I sat in the living room, staring at the walls, replaying the conversation in my head. Every word, every hesitation, every lie. My mind kept circling back to the same conclusion: she was cheating. There was no doubt about it now. I had asked her directly, and instead of denying it with conviction, she deflected. That hesitation, that look of guilt, it was all the confirmation I needed. I wanted to confront her again, to demand the truth, but what would that change? She had already decided I wasn't worth the truth. At some point, I must have dozed off, because I woke to the sound of her moving around in the kitchen. The morning light barely seeped through the curtains. She was making coffee, acting like everything was normal. Like she hadn't shattered the last bit of trust between us just hours before. I sat up, rubbing the exhaustion from my face, and watched her from across the room. She avoided looking at me. "You're up early," she said, stirring her coffee. "I didn't sleep much," I replied, my voice flat. She nodded, as if she expected that. She didn't ask why. Didn't apologize. Just kept sipping her drink like nothing had changed. I got up and walked past her to grab my own cup. I could feel the tension crackling between us, thick and suffocating. I wanted to ask her again, to push until she had no choice but to admit it, but I knew she wouldn't. Not yet. She wasn't ready to face the consequences. "I have to go in early today," she said casually, placing her empty mug in the sink. "Big meeting." Another lie. I knew her schedule. She never had morning meetings. I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Right?" Her fingers tightened around the strap of her purse. "What's that supposed to mean?" I shrugged. "Nothing." She let out a short breath and turned toward the door. "I'll see you tonight." I didn't reply. As soon as the door shut behind her, I grabbed my phone. I wasn't going to let this go. I needed proof. It didn't take long to find it. Her phone bill was linked to mine, and within minutes I was staring at a call log filled with repeated late-night numbers. A single one stood out, appearing over and over again. At first, I didn't recognize it, but after a quick search, my stomach dropped. It was him. A man I had once called my best friend. Someone I had trusted. My hands clenched into fists. This wasn't just some stranger. This was betrayal on a level I hadn't even prepared myself for. I sat there, staring at his name on the screen, my body numb with rage. How long? How long had they been laughing behind my back? The memories hit me like a freight train. The nights she had stayed out late. The weekends she claimed she was visiting a friend. The way she had started dressing up more, smiling at her phone when she thought I wasn't looking. And worst of all, the way she had made me feel like I was crazy for suspecting anything. I needed to be sure. I called out of work and spent the day putting together a plan. If I was going to confront her, I wanted to do it with undeniable proof. I needed to see it for myself. That night I followed her. She left around 7, claiming she was meeting some coworkers for dinner. I tailed her car at a distance, my grip tightening on the wheel with every turn she made. I already knew where she was going before she even pulled into his driveway. I parked a block away, my pulse hammering in my ears. The house was dark except for a single lamp glowing from the living room window. And then, like something out of a nightmare, I saw her. She stepped out of the car, checked her reflection in the window, and smoothed down her dress before walking up to the front door. The way she looked, excited, nervous, eager, was a look I hadn't seen in years. Not for me, at least. The door opened and there he was, standing there like he hadn't just ripped my life apart. He grinned, pulled her inside, and the door shut behind them. I sat there for a long time, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I could feel the anger boiling inside me, threatening to spill over. But I didn't move. Not yet. Because this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I sat there in my car, gripping the wheel so hard my fingers ached. The house in front of me remained still, the warm glow of the living room window mocking me. Inside, my wife, no, not my wife anymore, was with him. My so-called friend. My mind raced, trying to make sense of how we had gotten here. Had it started with a harmless conversation? A secret text? Or had they been planning this all along, laughing at me behind my back while I worked late, believing I was providing for a family that was already gone? The temptation to storm up to that door and rip it open burned inside me, but I didn't. Not yet. I forced myself to breathe, to think. A confrontation now would only give them the chance to lie, to spin it into something it wasn't. I needed undeniable proof, something they couldn't worm their way out of. I pulled out my phone and started recording, zooming in on the house, waiting for movement. If they were just friends, there'd be nothing to see, right? Minutes crawled by. My pulse thundered in my ears. And then, the final nail in the coffin. The curtain shifted, and through the small gap, I saw them. Their silhouettes were unmistakable. Her arms draped around his neck, his hands on her waist. And then she kissed him. Not just a friendly peck. Not something she could explain away later. A deep, intimate kiss, the kind that left no room for doubt. I stopped recording, my jaw tightening. That was it. That was all I needed. I should have felt something snap, should have felt the rage consume me, but instead there was only a cold, steady clarity. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a one-time thing. This was a choice. A deliberate betrayal made over and over again. And I was done being the fool who let it happen. I drove home in silence, my grip on the wheel firm but controlled. My mind was already planning my next steps. I wasn't going to scream or beg for an explanation. I wasn't going to waste my breath asking why. I already knew the answer because they wanted to, because they could, and because they never thought they'd get caught. By the time I walked through my front door, I had a plan. I was going to play it smart. Let her come home, let her pretend everything was normal. And then I'd lay everything out in front of her. The call logs. The video. The truth she had been so desperately trying to hide. I sat in the dark, waiting. Hours passed before I heard the familiar sound of her car pulling into the driveway. The front door clicked open and she stepped inside, slipping off her heels like nothing was wrong. Like she wasn't coming back from another man's house. "Hey," she said casually, setting her purse on the counter. "You're still up." I flicked on the lamp beside me, the sudden light making her blink. "Yeah," I said, my voice calm. Too calm. She hesitated, her eyes flicking to mine, sensing something was off. "Is everything okay?" I pulled out my phone and hit play. The video filled the silence between us. The moment she saw herself in his arms, her face drained of color. The lie was over. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. I watched her struggle, watched the gears in her head spin as she tried to figure out how to talk her way out of it. But there was no escape now. Say something, I said, my voice still eerily steady. She swallowed hard. I held up a hand, stopping her. Don't lie. Not this time. A long silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. And then finally she sighed, dropping onto the couch. I never wanted you to find out like this. I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. You never wanted me to find out at all. She stared at the floor, her fingers twisting in her lap. It's not what you think. I felt my jaw clench. Oh really? Because it looks exactly like what I think. She finally looked up, her eyes pleading. I didn't mean for this to happen. I shook my head, exhaling slowly. You don't just accidentally end up in another man's arms. That's not how it works. Tears welled in her eyes, but they meant nothing to me. Not anymore. I was lonely, she whispered. You've been so distant. Always working, always tired. I needed someone to talk to. My hands curled into fists at my sides. So instead of talking to me, you turned to him? I tried, she shot back, her voice breaking. But you never listened. You were always busy, always distracted. And he was there. I let out a slow breath, shaking my head. And that justifies this? She didn't answer. A sick realization settled over me. She wasn't sorry she did it. She was sorry she got caught. I leaned forward, elbows resting on my knees, and spoke the words I had been holding back for hours. I want a divorce. Her eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. No, she breathed. We can fix this. I let out a humorless laugh. Fix what? The fact that you've been sneaking around with him behind my back? The fact that you've been lying to my face? No. There's nothing left to fix. Tears slipped down her cheeks, but I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just exhaustion. She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. Please, she whispered. We've been together for so long. Don't throw that away. I stood up, looking down at the woman I once loved. You already did. She started sobbing, but I didn't stay to watch. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her alone with the weight of her choices. Because no matter what she said, no matter how many excuses she tried to throw at me, one truth remained. She had betrayed me. And I was finally done pretending that was something I could forgive. She didn't sleep in our bed that night. I don't know where she went, and I didn't care. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint sound of her moving around the house, probably pacing, probably crying. But that was no longer my problem. I had made my decision. There was no fixing this. No coming back. She had taken a sledgehammer to our marriage, and now she wanted me to help pick up the pieces. But I wasn't interested in rebuilding something she had already destroyed. By morning, the house was eerily quiet. I got up, showered, and dressed like it was any other day, but there was a heavy finality in the air. As I stepped into the kitchen, she was already there, sitting at the table with a mug of coffee she probably hadn't touched. She looked up at me, eyes swollen, dark circles beneath them. Did you even sleep? I asked, my voice void of emotion. She shook her head. I know. I grabbed a mug and poured my own coffee, ignoring the way her gaze followed me. I wasn't interested in playing into whatever guilt trip she was about to start. I don't want a divorce, she said suddenly. I sighed, setting my mug down. That's not your decision to make. Her hands curled around the ceramic, knuckles white. It doesn't have to be like this. I know I messed up, but we've been together for so long. We can get through this. I turned to face her. We? There's no we anymore. You destroyed that the second you decided I wasn't enough for you. She flinched, but I didn't feel bad. Not anymore. Please, she whispered. I still love you. I scoffed. Love? That's funny because I was under the impression that when you love someone, you don't sneak around behind their back with their best friend. Tears filled her eyes again, but I wasn't moved. I made a mistake, she pleaded. People make mistakes. It was never supposed to happen. I shook my head, exhaling slowly. You don't just trip and fall into an affair. It wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. One you made over and over again. Her lip trembled. I was lonely. And whose fault was that? I snapped. Mine? Because I worked to provide for this family? Because I wasn't around to entertain you every second of the day? That's not loneliness, that's selfishness. She let out a shaky breath, her hands tightening around the mug like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. I'll do anything, she whispered. Counseling. Whatever you want. Just, don't do this. I stared at her for a long moment, then shook my head. It's already done. Silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. I told the kids, I said finally. Her head snapped up, panic flashing across her face. What? I told them the truth. They deserve to know. Her eyes widened. You had no right to do that without talking to me first. I laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. No right? After what you did, you want to talk about rights. Our children deserve to know why their family is falling apart. I'm not going to lie for you. She shot up from her chair, her breath coming faster. What did they say? I crossed my arms. You should probably ask them yourself. She swallowed hard, knowing she wasn't going to like the answer. I grabbed my keys and turned toward the door, pausing just long enough to say the words that sealed it. I'll have the divorce papers sent to you. Then I walked out, leaving her standing there, shattered and alone. But I wasn't done yet. I had one more person to deal with. The man who had helped her destroy everything. My so-called best friend. I wasn't going to let him walk away from this unscathed. I didn't go to work that day. I had something more important to take care of. The betrayal had burned a hole through my life, but I wasn't going to let it go unanswered. My wife, no, the woman I used to call my wife, had made her choices, and now she was scrambling, trying to pick up the pieces, trying to make me believe that what she did was just a mistake. But I wasn't a fool. There was nothing left to fix. But him? The man who had looked me in the eye, shook my hand, pretended to be my friend? He wasn't going to get away with this. I drove across town, my grip tight on the steering wheel, my pulse hammering in my ears. I wasn't sure what I was going to do when I got there. I wasn't the type to throw punches, but right now nothing seemed off the table. His house was just like I remembered, neat, quiet, the kind of place where a man pretended to have it all together. I parked down the street, taking a deep breath before stepping out of the car. My fists were clenched at my sides as I walked up to the door, my anger boiling just beneath the surface. I knocked. Once. Twice. Then the door opened and there he was. For a split second his face registered shock, then something else, guilt, maybe even fear. Good. What the hell do you want? He asked, his voice tight. I didn't answer. Instead, I stepped forward, forcing him back inside, slamming the door shut behind me. You know why I'm here? I said, my voice low, steady. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. Look, don't. I cut him off. Don't you dare try to explain this away. You don't get to talk your way out of this. He swallowed, glancing toward the window like he was calculating an escape. You were my friend, I continued, my voice shaking with barely contained rage. I trusted you. I welcomed you into my home. And the whole time you were sneaking around with my wife. His jaw tightened. I didn't plan for it to happen. I let out a humorless laugh. Right? Just like she said. Funny how neither of you planned for it, yet somehow you both managed to destroy my family. He had the nerve to look uncomfortable, like this situation was somehow hard for him. I took another step forward, watching as he tensed. Tell me something, I said, my voice cold. Did you enjoy it? Sneaking around behind my back? Laughing at me? Pretending to be my friend while you were sleeping with my wife? His face flushed and he looked away. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? I snapped. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, unable to answer. Because we both knew the truth? He had betrayed me, plain and simple. There was no justifying it. I could feel my hands shaking, my vision narrowing as the anger threatened to spill over. I wanted to hit him. To knock him to the ground and make him feel even a fraction of the pain he had caused me. But I didn't. Because he wasn't worth it. Instead, I let out a slow breath and stepped back. You're a coward, I said, my voice steady now. A pathetic excuse for a man. And I hope one day you realize what you threw away for a few stolen moments. He didn't respond. I turned and walked toward the door, pausing just long enough to add, you two deserve each other. Then I left, slamming the door behind me, letting the sound echo through his empty house. But as I got back into my car, a thought hit me, a dark, twisted thought that made my stomach turn. They had both betrayed me. Lied to me. Made me feel like I was nothing. But I wasn't the only one they had betrayed. Our children, our daughter, in particular, had chosen her mother's side. She had defended her. Believed the excuses. She had blamed me for being distant, for working too much, for not being the perfect husband. And that meant she was blind to the truth. But how much longer would that last? Because if there was one thing I knew for certain, it was this. A person who betrays once will do it again. And my ex-wife? She was about to learn that the hard way. The days that followed were strange, almost surreal. The house felt empty, quieter than ever before. My son barely spoke to me, not because he blamed me, but because he didn't know what to say. I didn't blame him. How could he process something like this? His mother had shattered our family and his sister had walked away with her, choosing to believe whatever lies made this easier to swallow. I focused on what I could control. I met with my lawyer, started the paperwork, and made it clear that I wasn't interested in negotiations. I didn't want reconciliation. I didn't want to talk it out. I wanted her gone, legally and permanently. The house, the accounts, the custody, I had already made up my mind. I was fighting for my son, for what was left of my life. She, on the other hand, was still trying to save something that was long past broken. The messages started slow at first. Short, hesitant attempts to get me to talk. Can we just meet once? I know you're hurt, but this doesn't have to be ugly. I miss you. I ignored them all. Then she tried calling. I never picked up. I didn't care what she had to say. There was nothing left for me to hear. She had made her choices and now she had to live with them. But then something changed. Her messages became desperate. Please, just talk to me. It's important. I don't know what to do. I need you. I almost deleted it, but something in the way she worded it made me pause. This wasn't another attempt to manipulate me. This wasn't just guilt. There was something else. Panic. I didn't answer. The next day, she showed up at the house. I heard the knock, ignored it. Then the second knock, more frantic. Then her voice. Please, open the door. I wasn't going to. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of thinking she could just show up and pretend to be the victim. But then she said something that made me freeze. It's about him. For a long moment, I didn't move. Then finally, I unlocked the door and pulled it open. She looked different. The confident, arrogant woman who had justified her betrayal was gone. She looked shaken, exhausted, her face pale, her hands trembling. I didn't invite her in. What do you want? I asked coldly. She swallowed hard. I need to talk to you. Please. I crossed my arms. You lost that right the moment you crawled into bed with him. Her breath hitched. I made a mistake. I let out a short, bitter laugh. That's what you came here to tell me? That you regret it? Sorry, but that's not my problem. She shook her head, her eyes darting around like she was afraid someone was watching. It's not just about me, she whispered. It's about her. I frowned. Her? She exhaled shakily, looking down. Our daughter. Something in my chest tightened. What about her? She hesitated, then forced the words out. She's been seeing him. At first, I didn't understand. The words didn't make sense. Then, slowly, the realization hit me. The breath left my lungs. No, I said, shaking my head. That's not possible. Tears welled in her eyes. I didn't see it at first. I was so caught up in everything, so sure that she was just trying to support me. But then I started noticing things. I clenched my jaw. Like what? She let out a shuddering breath. The way they looked at each other. The secret conversations. The late nights she wasn't home. I confronted him. She let out a weak laugh, bitter and broken. You know what he said? I didn't answer. He said age is just a number. My fingers curled into fists at my sides. And you're just telling me this now? My voice was dangerously low. I didn't know how to, she admitted. I wanted to believe it wasn't true. I kept making excuses, kept telling myself that I was just paranoid. But today her voice cracked. I came home early. I closed my eyes. I already knew what she was about to say. I saw them, she whispered. Together. My breathing was ragged. Every muscle in my body was tight, my blood boiling. How long? I forced the words out. She shook her head. I don't know. Weeks? Months? Maybe even longer. Rage unlike anything I had ever felt threatened to consume me. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. This was something else entirely. She reached for my arm, her voice desperate. Please, you have to talk to her. She won't listen to me. She thinks she loves him. I yanked my arm away. You don't get to ask me for anything. She flinched. This is your fault, I growled. You let him into our lives. You defended him. You chose him. And now he's taken everything from you. How does it feel? Tears streamed down her face, but I didn't care. I know I don't deserve your help, she whispered. But she does. She's still our daughter. She doesn't see what he really is. I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to think. I had lost my wife. I had lost my best friend. And now, because of them, I had lost my daughter too. No. I wasn't going to let him take her. I met her eyes, my voice cold, steady. Where is she? She hesitated. Tell me. She swallowed hard, then finally answered. And at that moment, I knew exactly what I had to do. This wasn't over. Not yet. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new upload.